In this video, we're going to tie a fly called the Hare copper. It's a new fly developed by John Barr. First thing I went ahead and did was slid a gold bead onto the front of my hook. And I slightly oversized it. I like it to be nice and heavy for this fly. Then I took some 010 lead wire and wrapped it around the shank of the hook and then centered the bead with it. We're using a 2302 hook for this. It has a slight curve to it. So I just cover up all that lead wire with my thread and take it back to kind of the bend of the hook. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in our tail, which is just going to be some Partridge material. And I want my tail to be about half of the length of the overall fly. I basically just kind of pull back some feathers until I get a clump that I like for the tail. It's probably about 20 or so fibers. I just roughly kind of measure it out so it's about half the length, and pinch it off and just tie it right in. Then I can trim out that partridge. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread almost to the front. I'm going to stop just shy of the bead there. I'm going to take two colors of Brassie wire. The color I'm going to be tying today is the pheasant tail color, which is one strand of copper and one strand of kind of a copper brown color. And I'm just going to take that wire, I'm going to even up the tips of the wire. I'm just going to tie it in along the side of the fly. And I'm going to take that wire all the way back. I'm just going to stop a wrap or two short of the tail. And I want to build up a nice smooth tapered body for that wire to lay down on. You want a nice smooth foundation for it. If it's not smooth, your wire will be difficult to get to wrap evenly. So you just make a nice smooth underbody. I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to stop about a bead's length away from the bead. I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to hold it nice and taut and make that first wrap so that it comes right up against the tail. Then each wrap after that I'll try to make as even as I can right up against each other. That gives you that nice perfect segmentation. I'm going to wrap that wire a little farther forward than I actually need. That way I don't get any gaps when I tie in the casing. Then you can tie it off and cut or spin out the wire. I usually like to kind of helicopter it out. That way you don't get any sharp edges or burrs left on the wire. I'm going to wrap just a little bit back up onto that wire. I want the casing to be about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third of the length of the body. And for the casing, we're going to use a little thin strip of black Thinskin that's about the width of the gap of the hook. And to tie it in, I first actually want to tie my flashback before I tie that in. I'm going to use a piece of medium flashback material. I'm going to tie that in on the top so that it's centered right along the top of the center of the fly. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my Thinskin, and you can cut a little notch in your Thinskin. That'll kind of help you give it something to bite on, something to grab. You just kind of pull that mylar out of the way. I'm going to tie that Thinskin right on the top of the hook. I'm going to slightly pull it and stretch it. That way I get a nice clean tie-in with it. Then you can kind of pull it forward, make sure it's about what you want. Like I said, a little more than a third. Less than a half, more than a third. There we go, looks about good. Now we need to dub the thorax, which we're going to use some hare's ear dub for that. You can either use a blend or you can use a hare's ear fur straight from the hide. It's up to you. I pick these blends. They're a lot easier to deal with and they've gotten pretty good over the years. Wapsie, Hareline, they all make these hare's ear dub blends. We just want kind of that spiky natural look from the hare's ear dub. And I dub a nice bulky round thorax. You want it to be in the water and look pretty leggy, kind of like a stonefly or a large mayfly. This fly has some good weight to it with that wire body and that lead underwire wrap. So once I have that nice bulky body, I can just pull my thin skin over the top and make sure it looks the way I want it to look. Then I join that thin skin with that piece of mylar, and I'm going to pull it slightly taut. I'm just going to lay down a couple of wraps as I'm pulling it taut. That'll give that thin skin a nice clingy kind of look to the body. If you pull it tight, it'll kind of suck down and stick to the body, which is what we want. Then I'll take a couple of wraps underneath it. Then we can trim out our mylar. And to trim the thin skin, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pull the thin skin nice and tight, get in there as close as you can and trim it. That'll give the thin skin kind of the chance to suck down back up into the head of the fly. Just like so, and it'll kind of hide some of that extra material. And you can kind of grab it with your thread real careful to get it to sit and lay down. Next thing we're going to do is tie in the legs. For the legs, I'm going to use a partridge feather. And I just strip off some of the fluff near the base there. Then I'm going to cut out a nice little notch at the tip of the feather, just like so. And then I can pull back a few of the fibers till I get a nice little clump of fibers, about 20 or so fibers. Then I'm going to take that feather and I'm just going to slide it in so that it overhangs the casing just by a little bit. I want it just longer than the casing. I'm going to take a nice loose wrap of thread and then tighten down once I get it into place. Then you can maneuver your legs. Sometimes one side is a little crooked. You can just kind of use your fingers to push them where you want them. Then you can cut out the extra partridge fibers very carefully, as close as you can get. It helps to have a nice fine tipped scissor to do this. And you can carefully cover up those butt ends. Kind of grab them with your thread one wrap at a time. And we can then you can either whip finish. Sometimes what I'll actually do is if you have a little bit of exposed thread, I take just a smidgen of dubbing, just a tiny little bit, and you can kind of cover up some of that thread and make it blend into the thorax. Not necessary, but it just kind of helps clean up the fly a little bit. Then you can whip finish. Then the next step is to take a little bit of epoxy or some fly finish. I like to use the UV fly finish, and you can kind of pull the legs down out of the way, and I'll put a nice little dollop of fly finish on the top of my casing. and I'll use a needle to kind of work it in. I like it to kind of go back and touch the wire. I like it to go all the way to each side of the casing. You just want to make sure that it gets good coverage. And it's on there nice and even, and I'll creep into the dubbing on the front just a tad bit. Then you can use your UV laser or your light and cure it into place. Give your legs the last little adjustment, and that is the Barr's Hare copper. It's kind of a hybrid fly between a copper john and a hare's ear. Very buggy little fly, nice and heavy, great for freestone rivers, just a great little attractor pattern all around. That is the Hare copper.